Could Bigfoot be a fallen angel? Most people laugh at that question because they still see Bigfoot as a man in a costume, a blurry photograph, a campfire story that won't die. But when you start looking at the investigations of people like David Paulides, the picture that emerges is a lot stranger than just a big ape. You get DNA that no one can neatly classify, footprints that match no known species, witnesses who talk about eye contact and communication, and a government paper trail that suggests somebody in authority decided silence was safer than truth.
Could Bigfoot be a fallen angel? Well, one of the things that really isn't talked a lot about Bigfoot, but I ask often, is why is Bigfoot restricted from coming in contact with us?
When Paulides went to the Hoopa Valley Reservation in Northern California, he didn't arrive as a believer in supernatural giants. He came as a former cop, expecting to find what experienced investigators always expect with folklore: shaky stories, contradictions, and details that fall apart as soon as someone who knows how to interrogate starts asking hard questions. Instead, the Hoopa people talked about what they called the forest people, as if they were a long-standing part of the landscape. They described invisible boundaries in the forest, territory lines that neither the tribe nor these beings crossed. Nobody ever wrote those rules down, but everyone understood them. The tribe would sometimes leave food at the edge of the trees, not because they were terrified, but the way you quietly leave something out for a neighbor you've learned to share space with, and something in those trees would come and take it every time. To someone like Paulides, who has spent years listening for the difference between rehearsed lies and real memory, those small, practical details matter far more than dramatic claims.
The real dynamic signature of a consistent, functional aspect of the foot.
To push beyond stories and into something visual, Paulides brought in Harvey Pratt, a legendary forensic sketch artist who worked cases like BTK, the Green River Killer, and the Oklahoma City bombing. Pratt's job for decades was to sit with traumatized survivors and pull accurate faces out of broken memories, accurate enough to be used in court. When he sat with them and asked what they had seen, they didn't just talk about a shadow in the trees. They described deliberate, sustained eye contact, something looking at them, not as panicked animal prey, but as an aware, intentional mind. When Pratt translated those descriptions into sketches, he didn't end up with a cartoon gorilla. He drew faces with high cheekbones, deep-set, expressive eyes, and human-like structure. The kind of face that your brain would label as person, before your instincts screamed that something was off. Pratt told Paulides that what he'd just drawn was nothing like the typical Bigfoot imagery he'd seen before, and coming from someone with his experience, that reaction is hard to dismiss. From there, Paulides turned to the one field most people still trust as a final referee: genetics. Through his organization, he coordinated a study led by Dr. Melba Ketchum, a veterinarian and forensic DNA specialist. Her team analyzed 111 samples of hair and biological material taken from reported encounter sites across North America. The results they reported are exactly the kind of thing that makes this topic impossible to keep in a neat box. The mitochondrial DNA, which tracks the mother's line, came back as fully human, implying that somewhere in our history, a human woman is part of this lineage. But the rest of the genome, the paternal contribution, did not match any known primate species in the global genetic databases. The team's conclusion was that they were looking at a hybrid, part human, part unknown primate. A separate, longer-term project reportedly extracted additional DNA from degraded hair, producing sequences that also failed to match any known human or primate line. Whether you think the study is sound or flawed, the fact that it could not get a standard peer review speaks to how uncomfortable its conclusions were. Geneticists can also use mitochondrial DNA to estimate when a new line appeared. When analysis points to a hybridization event somewhere around 13,000 to 15,000 years ago, that place in time matters. It coincides with the end of the last ice age, the same era in which we already know early modern humans were interbreeding with Neanderthals and Denisovans. Modern genetics has confirmed that some populations today carry ghost DNA, traces of entirely unknown archaic humans that don't match any species we've identified so far. That doesn't prove that Bigfoot-like beings are real, but it does show that our family tree already has unnamed branches. If a hybrid line with a human maternal ancestor existed and survived, the idea is no longer as wild as it once seemed. And if these beings are truly part human, the question stops being just scientific. It becomes legal and ethical. What rights would such a being have? And what does it mean if governments knew this and chose not to acknowledge it? Physical evidence in the form of footprints adds another layer. In 1982, enormous tracks were found in fine loess soil in Washington state, a type of earth that can preserve microscopic detail when conditions are right. Plaster casts taken from these prints didn't just show size. Under magnification, they revealed dermal ridges, the fine skin patterns that create fingerprints and toe prints. Specialists in dermatoglyphics concluded that these ridges matched real primate friction skin, following natural flow rules that are extremely hard to fake in the field. The prints indicated a creature far larger than any known primate, with a foot structure more like a hominid than a typical ape, and a weight estimate in the 300 to 400 kilogram range. Anatomist Jeffrey Meldrum has highlighted another key feature in many of these casts: a flexible midfoot joint, known as a mid-tarsal break, found in some non-human primates and early human ancestors, but not in modern humans. This kind of foot flexion produces a distinctive walking pattern that is difficult to mimic with rigid props or boots, without leaving signs of the device itself in the soil. The consistent presence of that anatomical signature across casts from different regions suggests a real biological source rather than a simple hoax. Then there are the sounds. In the 1970s, recordings known as the Sierra Sounds captured strange vocalizations in the wilderness of the Sierra Nevada, rapid, layered noises that didn't match typical animal calls. A retired Navy cryptologic linguist, Scott Nelson, later analyzed these recordings using the same techniques he applied to human languages during his military career. He reported finding repeated phonetic units and structural patterns consistent with a genuine language rather than random noise. Subsequent acoustic analyses by wildlife researchers have treated the recordings as biological in origin, but inconsistent with known North American animals. On top of that, some witnesses report what they describe as telepathic communications during close encounters. Clear, specific messages in their minds without any audible speech. Indigenous traditions from various regions have long included the idea that forest people can communicate without words. It is these kinds of reports that push some people beyond pure zoology and into the territory of spirits, hybrids, or beings that operate in a way we would once have called angelic or demonic. All of this unfolds against a background of institutional unease and secrecy. The FBI did analyze alleged Bigfoot hair at least once, producing an official file that remained unseen for decades. Freedom of Information Act requests have turned up ranger reports, military logs, and other documents describing large, unknown bipedal creatures on federal land. The National Park Service, which oversees tens of millions of acres of wilderness, has offered limited transparency around missing persons cases, prompting independent researchers to map patterns themselves. Some of the strangest disappearances, children vanishing within sight of adults, no tracks, no scents for dogs, clothes found neatly folded, cluster in the same broad regions where Bigfoot traditions and reports are strongest. Correlation is not proof, but it raises questions about whether another intelligence might be sharing these spaces with us, and what officials have done with any evidence they've encountered. So when someone asks, could Bigfoot be a fallen angel? They're compressing a lot into one phrase. Strictly speaking, there is no universally accepted scientific proof that Bigfoot exists, let alone definitive evidence of a spiritual origin. But if you accept that there might be a real, intelligent, human-adjacent being out there, one that may have a hybrid genetic profile, a non-human primate anatomy, a structured language, and behavior that sometimes looks more like a boundary-keeping people than a wild animal, then the old stories about hybrid giants and forbidden unions start to feel less abstract. For people who interpret the world through the lens of Scripture, this can map neatly onto ideas about Nephilim, or fallen beings whose offspring blur the line between human and otherworldly. Whether or not that interpretation is correct, the evidence that something strange is happening in our forests forces a more immediate question. If such beings exist, and institutions have encountered them, what does it mean that the official response has so often been silence? Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a story about something frightening in the trees. It's about scientists who won't touch certain data because of what it might mean, about agencies that file reports and then lock them away, and about witnesses who carry faces and voices in their memories for years because they know nobody will believe them. This can be because we could stand this close to a truth this big and still decide that denial feels safer than knowing.